Well, hello and welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host. And before we get to today's participant, I would like to introduce you to a couple of cool ideas I got going on and a couple of references, and then we'll get started. So first, I'd like to take an opportunity to point you toward the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences. It's a sponsor of the podcast. It's a boutique integrative wellness center at thecenterforhas.com. We've created a community called Narmati. I'd like to introduce it. Narmati is a sanctuary for exploration, connection, and personal transformation. It's where you can dive deep into your spiritual journey, supported by a vibrant community of seekers and healers just like you. We're breaking new ground by integrating the biopsychosocial spiritual model, ensuring your entire being is being nurtured. Whether you're spiritual but not religious, or simply seeking deeper meaning and connection, Narmati offers a non-dogmatic space to explore, grow, and heal together. Join us for daily inspirations, weekly deep dive-ins, and a plethora of enriching events designed to empower your journey toward a more authentic, compassionate, and interconnected existence. Essentially, as The Sacred Speaks has been going, and Leila Scott, my wife, and I have been communicating about the needs we see, this kind of community keeps coming to mind. As healers, we're both clinicians, and most often people are lacking in community. And often in our religious settings, we have to believe a certain way or align with a particular ethos. Here, it's just the way we heal. We bond together by the ways in which we suffer, and we need to heal. So it's a community that's just starting. It's fresh out of the gate. So we'll be beginning our process starting in a few weeks. Go check it out. Sign up. It's a low monthly fee, and we'll connect you with all kinds of opportunities, including a meeting weekly with the Sacred Speaks community. So I'll be meeting on a live stream, and we'll be discussing what's going on with the Sacred Speaks. That's one of the reasons why I haven't been as present with the podcast in the past couple of months, because we've been building this, and I'm happy to release it. So check that out when you can. Also, check out The Sacred Speaks at thesacredspeaks.com, the Jung Center in Houston at junghouston.org, and of course, always check out the song at the very end called Clouds from the band Modern Nations. And today I'd like to introduce Ross Ellenhorn. You can check him out at ellenhorn.com or at cardea.net. Let me read through his bio and then we'll get started. Dr. Ellenhorn is a pioneer and leader in the development and promotion of a community integration service, types of care that serve and empower individuals diagnosed with psychiatric and/or addiction issues while they remain in their own communities and outside institutional settings. Trained as a sociologist, psychotherapist, and social worker, Ross Ellenhorn created the first fully operational intensive hospital division and wraparound program in Massachusetts, and went on to establish and lead one of the first public programs for assertive community treatment in the States. He's the owner and CEO of Ellenhorn, the most robust community integration program in the United States, which offers services outside of a hospital or a residential setting for individuals experiencing addictive behaviors and/or extreme complex states of mind and mood. Ellenhorn has offices in Boston, New York, and Los Angeles. Dr. Ellenhorn has authored 3 books on human behavior: Parasuicidality and Paradox, Breaking Through the Medical Model from Springer, 2007. It addresses the psychiatric hospital recidivism and techniques for diverting hospital use. Also, How We Change and 10 Reasons Why We Don't from HarperCollins in 2020. It takes a deep dive into the dynamics that influence all human change. And Purple Crayons, The Art of Drawing a Life, which is the book that we discussed. It's fantastic, actually. It addresses play as a central and vital human activity in our modern lives. He's authored numerous articles, given talks and seminars throughout the country, and provides consultation to mental health agencies, psychiatric hospitals, and addiction programs. Dr. Ellenhorn is the founder of the Shifting the Paradigm Conference, a biannual series that addresses humanistic and empowering changes in behavioral health care. He's the executive producer of the film Recovering Addiction, a public health rescue mission, a documentary on a new, less oppressive means for understanding problematic substance use. Dr. Ellenhorn is also the first person to receive a PhD from Brandeis University, the prestigious Florence Heller School for Social Welfare Policy and Management, the Department of Sociology. And he also co-created Cardea with our previous podcast participant, Dimitri. They're doing some really amazing work, experiential work. I highly recommend checking them out, and this book was lovely. You'll hear about it in a sec. So for now, I think that's it. Thanks for showing up, and we'll leave it there. Enjoy the show.
New love unfolds.
Dr. Ross Ellenhorn, I was told when you and I were about to meet each other for the first time that I was going to love you. And I'm excited that we had good conversations then, and we get to have more conversations now. But you actually, your work really sets up so many arenas that I'm very interested in. So
Mm.
on several different levels, like the categorization, mental health, how that affects us spiritually. Of course, you've been working in you've built businesses that are healing spaces, and you've also, of course, written incredible works. Um, One of which was about a children's book. Well, not so much about it. Inspired by you did what so many people tend to do with mythic tales. You did the same thing with a children's story, which I really
Ah,
love.
yeah.
You know,
Huh.
Yeah, it's like it's a little like what Robert Johnson would do to Parsifal or um, Tristan and Isolde. You take the
Mhm.
narrative and start to amplify and interpret aspects of it. And so the fact that you were doing that with a children's book from 1955, it speaks volumes to you, the way you set things up. So I'm pleased to be here with you today. I'm ready to dig in, and I'm glad you're here, Ross. Thank you.
I'm so glad I'm here too, because I that was a great talk that night with you.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and
good.
to have this time with you. Yeah.
Man. Well, let's start. Let's just do the setup thing. I mean, because I don't want to just focus totally on your book, even though that's
Mhm.
important. Because I also
Mhm.
read your document, The Sacred Originality.
Mhm.
I read a bunch of articles that are all kind of coming at this in different ways. But would you just let the audience know about who you are and what you're up to, and then we'll just kind of start engaging. Got a list of questions, but let's kind of free form. Let's riff a little bit first.
Mhm. You're asking who I am.
Yeah, who are you?
Um, well, um, I have a PhD in sociology, but I'm trained as a psychotherapist, and I um, began the part of my career that I loved. I began thinking and working about how we think about the social experiences for people who have been diagnosed with severe mental illnesses, and
Hmm.
how vitally important those social experiences are to their experience, and how often the effects of social experiences are misinterpreted as psychiatric symptoms.
Hmm.
So I created a company that basically is a hospital without walls. It's a way of kind of protecting people from the dangers of ostracism and stigma, lack of purpose, lack of meaning, the sort of things that happen to somebody who's been diagnosed, and also tries to help them recover from what we call psychosocial trauma, the trauma of what happens in our society to people who have been diagnosed with mental illness. So that's sort of what I've been doing the last 18 years, and then my other business is a psychedelic business, but we don't really think of it as a psychedelic business. We think of it as a company that's interested in the uh, the therapeutic event of play,
Mm.
and psychedelics can get us there, but we're really much more interested in the human event of play and how important it is. So that's a company called Cardea. And in the
Well,
meantime, I write, and I write stuff about, mostly now I write about play. It's just a thing that sort of grabbed hold of my brain, and I think about a lot.
Well, I want to, if we may, can we go into the territory that you spent that first portion of the 18 years on,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of lightly touch on that because really one of my interests, you said it right out of the gate. You have been critical of the
Mm-hmm.
medicalization of modern mental health,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and particularly of labeling and pathologizing human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if we can begin here just by sharing your insights on the
Mm-hmm.
effects of medicalization and really what this term mental health means to you,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the problematic aspects of how we approach, quote, mental health today.
Yeah, yeah. So, first of all, one thing to tell you is that this all began when I was 12, and before I turned 12, I went to kind of an alternative school in a college town, and I really prospered in that school. I really did well. But that town also was a suburb for the aerospace industry in California.
Mm.
And I went from that school to a junior high that really was much more for those aerospace industry, the children of aerospace industry executives. And I got immediately diagnosed as having a severe learning disability. Um, and at that time, that meant probably me going to a special school. And luckily, my parents resisted that. But the marking of me as broken and as disordered was a much more powerful event on my functioning than this thing they were calling a learning disability, which I now call the inability to factory learn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
God, let's evaluate that in a bit too. Just
yeah, yeah,
it's good.
yeah, yeah. And so that really set me on the course on some level, many years later to create this company and to get interested in what happens to a person when they're told they're broken. And um, also on what's called normalization, which is the power to tell people that they're sick and that they're not normal.
Mm.
And that's part of psychiatry, it's part of mental health. And mental health does something else too, mental health systems. It not only tells you that you're in the camp of not normal, it tells you that the only way to get out of that camp is through the services that they provide, which is a massive power move. It's taking what priests used to do. You sin, you want to get unsinful, you better come to me.
Yeah.
It's a massive act of power. And it's disempowering to the people that are being treated by systems that define them as broken and tell them that they can only get better through those systems. It ruins a person's sense of hope.
Mm.
Things that are called social buffers. These are things in our lives like social support, purpose, that make challenges in front of us feel like challenges, not threats. So they create these threatening world for the person because they have no support as they approach the world. And that ends up looking often like a mental health diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my critique. I think the people that work in the field are great. I think people have good hearts. They're trying their best, but they do live within ways of thinking that have an oppressive element to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a kind of thumbnail of my critique, you know. And then how do you help people recover from that damage? And I can talk later about my research on hope, but to me, it's a real damage on hope. And then how do you also protect people's hope? How do you um, protect them from the dangers of ostracism and a lack of their sense of value in the world?
Well, let me dig into this a little bit. Like how then are we to vision or understand what we do call or what we do consider pathologies? Because
Mm-hmm,
our culture is so invested in this sickness mentality. And I
mm-hmm,
like you, I'm sure I saw the transition from the diagnostic manual from four to fifth edition, and was, it's almost a joke that all of a sudden we have twice as many disorders as we
mm-hmm,
did the year before.
mm-hmm,
So I want to kind of unravel this power dynamic and look at, of course, the players that are involved. You're talking. The thing I really want to get into also, maybe we could fold that into this part of the conversation, is factory learning. So we have education models, we have insurance models,
mm-hmm,
managed care,
mm-hmm,
we have pharmacy, the pharma industry,
mm-hmm.
and then, of course, we have the whole entire institution, the broad institution of how we treat those pathologies. And so let's kind of unravel that a little bit and just look at kind of how we organize today, and then what your fantasy is about how we could if we actually expanded and resisted um, our uh, our tendencies to fall into these cultural pathways just because they're there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good question because I think there's such neglect in positions that say there's no such thing as extreme events of mind and mood. These people
Mm.
are, they're all just ex-shamans, and they're, having a hard time because they're not in the right culture for that, or that kind of stuff. It's just that becomes close to neglectful.
Hmm.
If you feel that people that are having these extreme events uh, don't need care, or don't need serious care, serious thought. And so we don't want to get in the business of saying there's no such thing as these perturbed events. um, but we also don't want to get in the business of saying it's an illness and a disease. There's this myth that if you call a person diseased, you get rid of stigma, which is insane.
Right.
Stigma was probably invented to get rid of people who are diseased. It's just insane. So NAMI,
Sorry.
National,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a National Alliance for Mentally Ill. It's a brain disease. That actually solved the issue. Um, and it creates a different kind of stigma, which is a different kind of morality, because supposedly you're releasing people from morality by saying they're diseased. And the morality is, because you're diseased, you're morally bankrupt if you don't seek treatment. And so that movement towards the diseasing of people is a power movement itself.
Mm.
But I might not be answering your question. And I apologize if I'm not. So there's that element. So how do we respect the fact that people are having these extreme events, while not making them into things? Because that's what our system does. It's saying you're a this, you're a that. It's really a dehumanizing process.
Hmm.
And that's by creating systems of significant flexibility that are respectful of the person's growth and those parts of the person that are actually moving towards transformation. Instead of a system that's focused on them being broken, it's focused on their courage and what they're doing to kind of move themselves towards something better.
Hmm.
And that becomes a system where you have to approach each person as unique. Because what are you doing in the face of these psychotic experiences that actually get you up every morning? And how can we tap into those things? And how can we kind of nurture those things? Instead of thinking that our job is to kind of remove the symptom.
Hmm.
You know? In my program, and they have a meaningful life, compared to somebody who doesn't hear voices and is completely tranquilized on medications. I picked the first one.
Yeah.
Somebody who is still drinking, but they have a meaningful life, compared to someone who's living a hellish existence and not drinking. I picked the first one.
Yeah.
So we have to change our system so they're about kind of humans as humans, not humans as broken things, without saying there's no such thing as these extreme events. That sort of gets neglectful. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we can really say it, because so many
Mhm.
folks don't have a
Mhm. Yeah.
real
Yeah.
peek inside of the
Yeah.
modern mental health
Mhm.
institution. I want to back even further up and just kind of pepper this story into our conversation. At the beginning of Robert Johnson's book, Owning Your Own Shadow,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful dive into the kind of unintegrated parts of ourselves, all the parts of ourselves that don't fit within the ego's ideal version of itself,
Mhm.
gets just kind of dismissed or denied or rejected.
Mhm.
And Robert Johnson has this great story that he talks. It's just one page, and so if you got the book, go reference it. But um, he says that there's a story that Jung really enjoyed, which is about the waters of life. And the waters of life emerge, and somebody stumbles upon it one day and finds it and says, "Oh my gosh, I have the waters of life," and goes to tell everybody about it. And then they
Yeah.
build a fence around it, and then they sell admission tickets in order to partake. And the water of life says, I'm out,
Yeah.
and it goes somewhere else. But the systems are in place that are still um, selling the substance, but its essence is gone. And then, of course, it happens again and again.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
whether we have, like, I think we're dealing with a human issue here, because whether it's education or it's mental health or it's psychedelics, which we're going to talk about,
Mhm.
or it's religion, the religion concretizes the experience and then creates institutional process and businesses and power systems out of it. So
Mhm.
there's nothing inherently wrong about religion. There's something inherently wrong about the way that human beings create systems around the anomalous mysteries of life. And
Yeah.
and so dive in. Yeah.
Well, no, no. I mean, I think that uh, no, I'm just diving in because I'm in agreement. I think though that the systems we create, they have a value. You know, um, um, meaning and connection and a sense of our own life within us depends on a matching between Apollonia and Dionysian experiences. And that's what all art is. So we need structures around us for us to be able to not just live in noise, but in music.
Yeah.
And and so it's always both are on the scene. There's always something containing that water. But it's when that something becomes the event
Yeah.
where we're in trouble.
Mm.
But the opposite's true too. If it's all just water, it's noise. So that's called narcissism. You know, this grandiose kind of like, oh, we're just free to do whatever we want and all that kind of stuff. It just becomes an orgy. It loses any kind of production other than the event.
Yeah.
You know, and so both things can go wrong. Both things can take over. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Totally. Well, I want
yeah,
to and
yeah,
define
yeah,
this for the
yeah,
listener or the
yeah,
viewer
yeah.
that this really great reference to Apollonian and Dionysian, we're talking about the parts of our human experience that need structure and rightness and
Mm-hmm,
correctness and clarity, and
mm-hmm,
it's a solar aspect of our consciousness. And Dionysian is a signifier for the wildness or erotic or mysterious, more
mm-hmm.
chthonic and feminine aspects of our consciousness. But there's this trend in human beings to assert a definable, clear structure that's measurable and
Mm-hmm.
observable and manageable, as opposed to be in this space of mystery, this kind of Dionysian wildness. And part of our mental health issue is that we've forgotten our the dual, the value of having several.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, even like in free jazz, the first thing they're doing is trying to figure out how are we going to talk to each other. You know what I mean? If they didn't, it would be noise. The first thing they're trying to figure out is, are we going to be able to find a key? Are we going to be able to find a time signature? Are we going to be able to find something with each other? You
Mhm.
know, or some repeated something. You know, so it's always this dance between the two. And when either one takes over, we're in trouble.
Mhm.
You know, and it feels like most often it's the Apollonian. It's like, okay, this thing's just emptied of any meaning now. You know, it's just become rote. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and most people would say that we're so clearly we privilege our kind of visual form of consciousness that is tangible and observable and measurement. And William Blake
Mm-hmm.
wrote a lot about this with our sensory system and how we need to cleanse ourselves um, of the allegiance we have to our sensory reality, as opposed to kind of deeper, more inner aspects
Yeah,
of our realities. So,
yeah.
so when it comes to, if we push this down, like when it comes to um, this alternative that you're offering, which
Mm-hmm.
is a dialogical model. You
Mm-hmm.
involve play, and you
Mm-hmm.
certainly have spent a large amount of your career critiquing medicalization and
Mm-hmm.
categorization.
Mm-hmm.
You referenced it earlier. Also, jazz. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to go there a lot. How do
Mm-hmm.
concepts like play and your dialogical model, and maybe you want to fill that in what that is,
Mm-hmm.
offer alternative perspectives on healing? I mean, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we have the like, you are sick, and this is who you are, and here's your label, and you must see it how I see it, and if you don't, then sorry, tangent. It reminds me of that study that I learned in like grad school, when those grad students checked themselves or got checked into an
Yeah,
inpatient center and couldn't
yeah,
get out. Like they were like,
yeah,
I'm all good, man. I'm just fucking with you. And
yeah.
they couldn't leave. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
let's talk about the challenging the sick cure model in psychiatry and addiction, but really talking about concepts like play and the dialogical model that
Sure,
you've
sure,
proposed.
sure. So I appreciate you're asking for the solutions. I'm going to try my best. I don't know them all. I know, I'm lazy that way. I definitely know the critique. but I think that this dialogic thing fits in with something, and I'm gonna tell you that story a little bit. The
Good.
dialogic work comes from this place in Finland where they started doing this thing called open dialogue with people who were having psychotic experiences, which people tie to what's called schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
And what they discovered is when a person calls or a family calls about that, if they have a meeting with the person in which the very opposite of defining them happens, in which there is no what they call formulating going on, in which the people in the room, the clinicians, just say what's going on in their head, just reflect. The person calms down. And from this massive experience of estrangement, which is really what psychosis feels like, they feel connected because they're in a space where people are willing to kind of offer their response to the person without defining the person. And all of a sudden they calm down. That's a model that doesn't say there's no such thing as a psychotic experience, but it also says the only way to help the person is get to their humanity, get to who they are through this process, not defining them. This is what I think is going on for you. But getting into this kind of jazz-like space with that. The United States has more treatment for psychosis and more psychotic people. So something wrong is going on. Here's what we do. If you have a psychotic experience, the first person you're going to meet is a police officer. The worst thing possible for a person having a psychotic experience. The next thing that's going to happen is you're going to go to an emergency room. Worst thing possible when you're having a psychotic experience. Next thing that's going to happen is you're going to get locked up on a psychiatric unit. The worst thing in the world for somebody having a psychotic experience to be on. And all of that is about how do we get the medications to this sick person.
And just to add to that, I mean, it's the worst thing in the world for anybody who's not sick too. Like to go into a center that's treating psychosis is a psychotic creating space.
It is. That's right.
Psychosis creating. Yeah.
I agree. And now here's the science on psychosis. Sure, there might be something going on in the person, biologically, but we know that disconnection and stress spur psychotic events. So our country, because we have dehumanized people with psychosis into these things that need fixing, stress them and disconnect them as treatment. That is symptom producing. It's what they call iatrogenic. And so so the model should be something like a listening model, a model where we're spending time with the person in a way where we're not making them feel like a thing, but trying to have this kind of reflective experience with them. The other crazy thing in this country is we tell people that they're diseased if they have an addiction.
Yeah.
Then we tell them we can't help you for your disease unless you don't exhibit symptoms of your disease, and then we can help you.
I mean, I hope you understand, listener and viewer, that the laughter is at the absurdity of these propositions and not, I mean, Ross and I are both people who've worked in these painful places with folks. So there's a certain absurdity with who's creating these pathways anyway. Like it of course it's institution. It's not heart.
Yeah. And exactly, it's not heart, and it's about dehumanization. It's about you're a thing that is broken that needs to fix. Just like you send a washing machine to the Maytag factory to get fixed, we're sending you to a factory to get fixed because they have the right tools at that factory for your particular problem. Is addiction a problem? Yes. The best name for addiction is not disease. The best name for addiction, I've come up with this very fancy term, is addiction. And it's a whole other thing. And you can help people with it by allowing their use so they can talk about it, by having a relationship with them while they're using.
Yeah.
And by allowing them to contemplate their situation. So I'm not saying there's no such thing, But the actual way to treat it is not to say your brain is hijacked and I have to
No.
kind of push you into this thing. That's a power move.
Right.
So I hope I answered your question, because I'm saying there are solutions without having to say there's no such thing as these things, which I think is really neglectful, right? You know?
Well, it's almost a catch 22 because you have to posit solutions, but also solutions are part of that Apollonian orientation you were talking
Mhm,
about, and that
mhm,
like it's experiential. I think the Apollonian place is where I love your jazz reference. Of course, as a musician, I get that so quickly. That even when you're creating a band, you're like, hey, what are your influences and what are
mhm,
mine? And here's my, I'll date myself, my not my playlist, but my mixtape, because that's how we used
mhm.
to roll. Here's
Yeah,
here's my mixtape. Here, I'll take
yeah,
yours,
yeah,
and then we'll figure this out. And we're in a kind of blues band or a jazz band, and then we see what happens, and there's
yeah.
something that happens. And I to me, addiction it gets scapegoated in the West. I don't
Mhm,
know how it exists in other spaces, but
mhm,
I wish people talked about our addictions as
mhm,
opposed to addiction as if the person with substances is the bad addict, and I then don't have to look at my consumerism or my materialism or my addiction to suffering or my victim
mhm,
mentality or all these like subtle process addictions that are addictions.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
But our whole culture just is addicted, and we all are complicit in the game.
Yes, yes, yes. And um, we have we have dangerous addictions, and we call all addiction dangerous, but there are actually really really important addictions. I'm pretty addicted to sleeping next to my wife at night, and I go into a kind of withdrawal if 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 I don't have that.
Yeah.
And because and all this research on addiction and attachment are kind of the same thing. The addiction is
Right.
replacing our connection to people. So I'm pretty
Mm.
addicted to writing. I feel like this real sense of loss when I'm not doing it, and I feel like I got to get back to it. So it's also just sort of this pathologizing of all addiction, instead of there are elements in our lives that have a habitual quality to them that we can't quite control, that create beauty for us. There are habits
Mm.
that create beauty,
Mhm.
you know and habits we can't quite stop, and that we feel
Mhm.
pain when we're not engaged in them, that are on the addiction continuum. you know um it's why we cry when someone dies. It's a kind of withdrawal. It's a grief
Mhm.
with um
Mhm.
yeah.
I want to be sure we kind of
Mm,
wring this towel dry here, because I,
yeah.
I I still find a curiosity about, because those who are listening should know that if you looked at Ross Ellenhorn's website, you would see a bunch of incredible people who are involved in these programs that you've established,
Mhm,
and you have an entire system that is, I think, built on the nature of the exploratory nature of dialogue and not
mhm,
the punitive nature of our current model. And so I want to see if there's any stories that come to mind about how this operates in practice, this dialogic model, and just so we can really get, because I think it's actually a good setup for what we'll talk about
mhm,
when we get into psychedelics and kind of the modern
mhm.
territory.
Yeah, I mean, John, the fact is that I'm actually not inventing anything.
Hmm.
uh, I'm trying to tap into what you could call a psychotherapeutic ethos,
Hmm.
which is getting kind of destroyed right now. And to me, that ethos is, I'm helping people contemplate their problems of living. I'm creating a safe space for them to do that. And I can't control their behavior. That's what psychotherapy was. Oh, and it's improv, that I don't
Hmm.
actually know where the session's going to go. It's
Yeah.
exactly like when you're talking about putting together the band. I don't know where this is going, but it's improv in service of a person's suffering and pain.
Yeah,
where
well said.
one person isn't trying to get gratified, right? And so that's all I'm trying to do is bring that to larger psychiatric care to people who have really complex experiences. So at Ellenhorn, my company deals with people you would think need to be in the hospital or residential program, and we serve them in their own homes to a mobile team and do a really robust like hospital without walls. And the whole idea is you can do that and they do better um, that way, you know? Um, and we have seen people that are considered, schizophrenic and never to recover. We've seen them recover.
Mm.
It takes years, but we've seen them recover. And we see people, quit addictive behaviors. And we see all kinds of changes related to their ability to feel like they have control of their lives. And we're really based on this concept of what's called the dignity of risk. And I think psychotherapy is too, that I'm going to have to live with the risk that you might harm yourself or something will go wrong. I'm going to have to live with that if I'm going to help support your empowerment towards change. And so that's kind of a central element in Ellenhorn.
I want to
Yeah,
double click on this. You
yeah,
said
yeah,
where one person is not trying to get gratified.
yeah,
Say
yeah.
more about that.
Well, I said trying because I think it's just constant failure. But I
Mm.
think that a therapist is trying to lower their need for gratification. To,
Like I need you to get better so I feel good about my professional life.
yeah, I need you to
Yeah.
laugh at this joke. I need
Yeah.
you to, anything that is like, I'm trying to kind of feel like I got something out of this.
Yeah.
Um, and then a sense of forgiveness for the fact that you're only going to fail at that. That a therapist is only going to fail at that. That it's our survival is based on gratifying ourselves. Our entire lives have been through gratification. So it's really hard to do. But it's really worth the work of trying to resist it, you know? And I do think, John, that's when we talk about boundaries, we could talk about like uncreative ones, like don't have lunch with your client, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we could think about
How about
anything
how about
where,
how about don't hug your clients?
yeah, exactly. 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 Don't hug your client if you're doing it because you need to feel hugged,
Mm-hmm.
not don't hug your client.
Right.
And if you do that, you're never going to borrow money from your clients. You're never going to have sex with them.
Mm-hmm.
All those things we're worried about are going to go away if we just don't say there's one set things of boundaries and limits to therapy. Just
Mm-hmm.
the one limit is your gratification. You cannot live in that. That's sort of what I mean. Does that make sense to you?
Totally.
Yeah,
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 it does.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
on this, while we're still kind of
yeah, yeah,
tracking this idea of modern medicalization and
yeah.
kind of your
Mhm.
treatment mechanism, Nancy McWilliams comes to mind, and
Uh-huh.
if we just
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
talk about where I wanted to go there is that early on, I think in our diagnostic approach, um, my understanding is that diagnosis was really for clinicians to communicate in a shorthand to each other about the symptoms that somebody's experiencing. And over time, it's morphed into a kind of now it's in the pop culture. I mean,
Mhm,
the diagnosis
mhm,
is language that's used by everybody, and
mhm,
it then becomes identity and not a kind of helpful heuristic to
mhm.
help you and I communicate really quickly about kind of how I can approach somebody. Like if you're
Yeah.
saying somebody's quote schizophrenic, I know very quickly how I can enter a room,
Mhm,
some assumptions I may make about how I engage. If
mhm,
somebody is, experiencing sexual trauma, I know kind of what the territory is pretty
mhm,
quickly. So post-traumatic stress, or if somebody's ADHD,
mhm,
it's a helpful tool to speak in shorthand. It is
mhm.
not an identity.
That's right. That's
Uh,
right. That's right. Yeah.
so yeah, what comes up there?
What comes up there is, I mean, um, yeah, I agree. I mean, uh, being a therapist or a treater is about um, uh, living with what I think of as an internal polyphony.
Mm.
that you don't have one idea, you have a lot of ideas, and they're guiding your listening.
Mm-hmm.
They're not defining what's happening, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't do
Mm-hmm.
therapy and be certain. Certainty is the destroyer of therapy. And so, because therapy is all about how do I deal with uncertainty, that's basically what it is on some level. So 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 a diagnosis is it only works if it's part of a polyphony. Oh, I see why that the depression might be part of why this person's saying that thing, you know? But if it becomes, oh, I know they're depressed, and everything they're doing I can define through a depression diagnosis, you're in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
you know? I mean, I just think it's luscious, the concept of borderline and narcissistic processes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just because we see it in ourselves and we know what it
Yeah.
is, and we
Yeah.
can have compassion for it.
Right.
But when it becomes borderline personality disorder, um, first of all, John, how many ordered personalities have you met? And would you want to hang out with an ordered personality?
I'm a fan of disorder. I'm
Yeah,
with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think Al Gore is an ordered personality. And I wouldn't want to hang with him. Right? Right. And how many ordered attachments do you have in your life?
Right.
I have none, and I would hate it,
Yeah.
you know? So but to understand what it means to have borderline experiences is just so helpful.
Oh my gosh, it is. That's,
But
on this,
yeah,
in this
yeah,
note,
yeah,
somebody, when I
yeah,
was working in a residential center years ago, one of the clinicians was walking down the hallway and was like, "Oh my God, my narcissism is on fire today." And I
yeah,
found it to be such a refreshing language system to to not to not be treating those people there, but to be relating in a human experience here. That
yes,
I love this, Ross, this thread. Yes.
yeah, yeah, and I don't know, man. I think that I think that DSM is like, if we could just treat it as these kind of remarkable poems about the different menagerie of human suffering,
Ooh.
it'd be a really cool book. You're like, oh my God, you right?
I'm in.
Yeah, that'd be a cool book, right? That'd be like, whoa, they figured that one out. That's really fascinating. But not as a thing that's saying these are the categories of a disease.
Yeah.
That's like dangerous. It's not good for people. It's not, you know, ever, you know.
Ever.
But it doesn't mean we can't use diagnoses. It's just when they become this thing where it's about what Michel Foucault called the clinical gaze. I've got you figured
Mm.
out.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's an act of power. That's what it is. I mean, to me, that's what
Mm.
it is. I can't think of anything else but that. That's what it's doing. It's disempowering somebody through knowledge. I know you.
How many times does that happen in romantic relationships?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thread, man. That sometimes I can't wait to where I go back and edit this episode and I get to revisit exactly what and just sit there. I can see myself in 2 weeks just going, what a fucking awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I'm having a nice tangential time with you. I hope that's okay.
Tons. I'm
Okay.
in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
Okay.
do
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So my favorite, really, I'm in love with him. Is this guy Winnicott? I've really fallen in love with him.
I can tell in your
Yeah.
writing. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And he has this line. It, it's a blessing to be hidden and a tragedy not to be found. And
Mm.
remarkably, he was talking about peekaboo, which is kind of cool. But he was also saying something really important, which is you need to be witnessed,
Amen.
but there are uncommunicable parts of us that are the most sacred parts of us
Absolutely.
that nobody's ever going to see because they can't be communicated.
Right.
And it's painful and agonizing when somebody tries to see it
Mm.
or when somebody tries to define it.
Mm.
And therapy, in my mind, is about how do I let that incommunicable part express itself without communicating?
Mm.
How do I let it be in the room without it being something I've learned about the person? How do I let that noetic,
Mm.
ineffable part of them into the room? And the opposite of that is you're this, you're that. I've got you figured out. This is why you're doing what you're doing. You know, um, and that's sort of how we treat, especially chronic, quote unquote, chronic mental illness, right?
Mhm. God, that's a problem. Well, yes, those systems serve that, but I do want to go like we do that in relationship. I can't tell you how many, I know you see it, how many people I work with whose previous partner was a narcissist.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we get into this pop psychology where all due respect to anybody listening, I do want to say that there's a particular concern that I have for people who have a bachelor's in psychology
Yeah.
and they go out there in the world to like use that skill set to type everybody and to
Mm-hmm.
define, because it's, to me, graduate work was really doing that platonic shift where it was like, um there's something that I can't know, there's something unknowable, and
Yeah.
there's something inherently mysterious. And I think training teaches you that you don't know anything and you need to keep loose. But
Yeah.
when you're early on in your training, everything is so concrete and so fixed and so
Mm-hmm.
definable. Because again, I think there's a gratification process that happens as somebody's kind of saying, "Oh, I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand what this is." But wow, there's a lot of trespassing that happens on other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I think that a lot of trespassing and a lot of violations of a psychotherapeutic ethos, what if you
Yeah.
agree with that, right? Like we know that, not that I'm super trained, but we know that being a good psychotherapist takes training and supervision
Mhm.
and all this work on yourself and all this ability to kind of be a person in the room with the person during this improv.
Mhm.
And we're not living in that world now. We're living in a world where you go and you learn this new screwdriver for this particular problem,
So
right?
sad.
I mean,
Oh.
how, John, how much do you think your therapy is about creating a, a kind of holding environment for the person so they can change?
Yeah, the metaphor that just came to mind is I tend to want to scratch the surface of adaptations that create resistance to genuine expression.
Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, you want to, yeah, yeah. To me, that's containing. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
you're kind of like,
Yeah,
this is the place where I'm going to kind of contain you here. I'm going to give you something to push up against
yes, yeah,
to
yeah.
then be
I
able
like
to
that.
process this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's right,
Mm-hmm.
right. So I personally believe that that sort of thing is the cure.
Mm-hmm.
That and holding the ability that I'm listening in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's not impinging on you,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm there vitally with you, creating this, right? Most of the therapies today completely ignore that.
Yeah.
Most of the therapies that these young people are doing today are about how do I help this person learn distress tolerance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? How
Mm-hmm.
do I help this person learn this? How do I use this technique? Rarely are they about how do I create a holding relationship or a containing relationship. They're almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that worries me. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
it is, isn't it? Because it's just a miss. Like so earlier, you said factory learning.
mhm, mhm,
And I think that's kind of it. Like we're all inundated with this factory learning model. And
mhm,
so I want to plant that seed, but also the thought that came up is that you critique this however you need to,
mhm,
because I'd
mhm,
love to get your wisdom here. Um, I've been saying to people recently that I believe most psychotherapists are unconscious of the fact that they're in a religious or spiritual vocation,
mhm.
and that there's for one a lack of understanding of what that is, but also there's the capacity to colonize the experience of each individual in service to that particular worldview, as opposed to help them connect with their inherent mystery and be expressive in who they genuinely are. And so I actually find I really am with you what you said earlier about psychotherapists being these beautiful, tend to be beautiful and heart centered and loving folks, but their lenses oftentimes are restrictive and descriptive and
Yep.
prescriptive, and
Hmm.
they're not erotic. Um, and what is it like? Every psychotherapeutic paradigm knows that the core change agent is the relationship, but
Yeah, I know.
we
Yep.
don't teach relationship. We teach categorization.
I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. We don't, you know, Paul Tillich said, all sin is separation. We teach separation.
Yeah. Wow.
We
Yeah.
teach separation. We teach the separation of dehumanization of you're a thing, you're this, I'm fixing you. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let's jump. But go on. Go. Are you? Yeah.
Well, I'm really fascinated by this because I keep running into this conversation, John. The last 2 weeks, people talking about the events in psychotherapy are religious events.
Hmm.
And what they're meaning by that, mostly, and it might mean something different to you, um, that moments in which there is an us, God's present.
Yeah.
And the feeling at that moment is God's present. We just don't name it.
Hmm.
But in my own therapy, when in my work as a person getting therapy,
Hmm.
I feel that in those moments where I'm not quite me because I'm with another and there's an us and there's that mysterious third in the room. And
Hmm.
I don't know how to name it, but to say I'm in touch with God. And I keep having this and I'm not initiating these conversations. I keep having this
Hmm.
conversation. It's just really interesting. People saying, why are we not talking about that element? You know, why are we extracting it from therapy?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
That partially it's that we are all these kind of fractalized cosmological expressions of the all, and so
Mm-hmm.
our exploration of what's happening in our inner world opens us up to the outer world. And I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
Goethe. This is old ancient philosophy that we're
Yeah, yeah,
um uh, so I mean, to me, the experience of psychotherapy is actually exploring the nature of consciousness in dialogue, because my old mentor used to say, "We're in this world alone, but we can't do this world alone." And
mm.
Lou Reed says, "Let me be your mirror,"
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah,
there's this commitment to say, "Hey, let's get into a relationship that's really about you and your expression." But I'm a human in the room that can hold you and be with you. And
yeah,
I'll reflect for you parts of yourself that you can't necessarily see because they are undefinable and unlanguageable.
yeah.
But by the nature of our dance, hopefully you come to more awareness of the unique the unique and paradoxically universal expression of that miraculous force we call consciousness, and to have that in a sacred ritual, to me, is inherently religious because it's the expression of the mystery in human form, in relational love, that is profoundly curative on a deep level, not because there's anything given to you. It's because we're so relational that when we invest in creating a relationship that is a holding container, that's the miracle cure. It's that we've both put our time, energy, and attention into creating the container where the magic happens.
That's great. You should have a podcast.
I thank you
That's really great.
for
No,
your
that's really
encouragement.
that's really great. And what that's really beautiful, John. And what goes on in my head right now is everything you just said is countercultural.
Amen, man. Yes,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah,
Go there. What
yeah.
do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, it's just makes me sad to think about, but we have to fight for intersubjectivity,
Amen.
for
Yeah, yeah.
relationship, for encounter with one another. We have to find it. We can't just show up at dinner on Sunday night and it's there.
Yeah.
We have to work at it, and it's sort of tragic. Yeah, and we have to go to therapy for it. Some level.
I think that
Yeah,
all the time. I say to
yeah,
these people I'm working with, I'm like, guys,
I facilitate a couple of men's groups. I'm like, guys, if we danced around the fire every, other night and,
Yeah,
painted our bodies and yelled at the moon and howled and like ran around and
yeah.
embodied ourselves, and then we sat around and talked about what was meaningful, I'd be out of
Mhm.
the job.
Yeah.
And and I'd love that. I mean, I
Yeah,
want that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I do want to get back. Yeah, I do want to get back to that gratification thing. The one
Totally.
thing you are offering that you don't get in that is a listening voice that's trying not to be too gratified. And that removes
Hmm.
so much
Hmm.
noise from the
Hmm.
event that it becomes therapeutic. In other words, all I'm thinking about as the person in therapy is not how do I take care of John, but how do I take care of getting to us? And that's a powerful thing to offer people, right? Right? That's like,
Amen, man.
that's an art. That's a full-on
Yeah.
art form. That's a full-on art form. It's an improvisational art form that happens to be treatment, but that's what it
Mm.
is. It's this kind of profound thing to offer people, you know?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Well, I
And it's
want to
curative. Yeah.
I want
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
dive into, speaking of cure, into psychedelics,
Mhm,
and kind of because you're mentioning this company that I love that you said it's not really psychedelic, it's more of a play based,
mhm,
improv
mhm,
space.
mhm,
But if we could just tap into that, like
mhm,
psychedelics as coming on the scene, talk about
mhm,
counterculture,
mhm,
and what its role could be, is, and
mhm,
most importantly, from an insider perspective, what's happening in the world of psychedelics from a larger, um, maybe structural space, and
mhm.
what are your concerns about how this is rolling out?
Yeah, I must sound really cranky because all I got is criticism. But let me just say, like, there is a movement going on in the world that is the most unpsychedelic movement possible. And that movement is called psychedelics.
Yeah.
It has just become this business. And it's
Hmm.
become this process of defining people, a cure for depression,
Hmm.
immediate cure for depression.
Hmm.
It's magic bullets being sold right and left in ways that hurt people because people now think psychedelics is my last chance to take care of my depression. If this miracle drug doesn't work on me, I'm really that broken.
Hmm.
So that is a powerful problem that's going on because it's basically entered a space that wasn't there in the 60s, which is big money within treatment. That happened in the 80s and 90s, and it's entering into that in the United States. So I got some problems with that. Um, but I think that psychedelics are a way to get us to a place where we're able to play. But that means they're a key to a key. The key is play. They're not the answer. They're just a tool to get us to play. And I'll fight for my life to say my moments of deep conversation with people like you and I are having, or what I've had in therapy, are much more powerful and important than any psychedelic journey in my growth. Psychedelic
Hmm.
journeys are remarkable. They're fantastic. They're living in an IMAX theater. I mean, they're just profound, but they aid me in having this conversation with you, maybe. But this conversation with you is much more important to me. And you know, that comes from being raised in a period of time where there's a thing called Marxist humanism. And Marxist humanism was really worried about when people take their own power and put it into idols outside of themselves.
Mm.
And a famous thinker was in that was this guy named Eric Fromm who wrote about this all the time, right? And the psychedelic movement is becoming this new idolatry,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so that's my problems with it. What I like about it is I think it can aid us uh, in becoming uh, more open to novelty, uh, more able to handle uncertainty in a way where we can find the joy in uncertainty, and it can help us get to a place of play. Um, But all it's doing is getting us back to our humanity. It's not the answer. The humanity is already there, you know? Yeah.
Let's play with play. What is play in your mind?
Well, it's such a fascinating thing because we don't define it, and we associate it with thrill and with fun. But play is really serious business. So the first thing about play to know is that play is the act of taking something that feels solid and discovering that it's malleable and that you have some ability to control it. So all play is taking something outside of you in a way and then playing with it and then making it into something that you have some control over. So play works in dealing with your suffering, because all of a sudden suffering becomes not something that defines you, but something that you can kind of do something with. All play is at the center of creativity. All play is at the center of revolt, because in revolt, what you're doing is you're saying those stories are telling us about the fact that we have no power or wrong. We can actually change those stories. It's always this element of taking something solid and making it malleable. That's one element. When children are playing, they're playing with a toy given to them. They're playing with a block, a hard block, and they're making that thing into something that feels like it's loose and open and has the capacity to do something with it. Next thing is the thing they do with it is give voice to themselves. So play is not just making something malleable, but making something malleable in which you take the outer world into your inner existence and then put it back into the world. It's taking something that feels like you'll never be able to interact with it, making it malleable, using it in a way, and then expressing yourself with it. That's what a child's doing with their toy. It's just a thing made in a factory. They're taking it into their imagination and they're putting it back out into the world as something that now has a piece of them in it. How am I doing? Am I making sense?
The thought, like shame, could that be an example of how we can be like? I immediately thought of a group therapy circle where we're like working with shame. There's a playfulness.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, Winnicott said that if you're a therapist and you can't play, you can't be a therapist.
Yeah.
If you're a therapist and your client can't play, you need to find a way to help them get to a playful state, because no therapy is going to happen unless there's play. An interpretation by a therapist is harmful if it's not done within a state of play, right? Where it's malleable, it's not defining, it's not certain, it's part of the interaction. So picture a child. They have this non-malleable thing that they've made malleable. They've given voice to themselves through that thing because they've created a story about that thing that will never be told again and never has been told before. It's an original event, what they're doing with this toy. It's an act of improv. The toy feels like it's alive. So play is the thing we do to imbue life into things. So play is the opposite of dehumanization. When we're at play, we see the life in other things. In fact, a child sometimes feels their toy is more alive than their parent. You know, and so they're putting life in that toy. At the same time, in play, they're feeling alive. They feel life coursing through them. My belief is when you don't feel alive, it's because you're not playing. It's a signal that you're not in a state of play.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So play and aliveness go together. In that state of play, they're also having the sense that they're doing it in relationship to somebody who's holding space for them, which is their parent. And so in that, they're also feeling the aliveness of relationship. And so three things are happening at that time. They're alive. The outer world's alive, which, by the way, is the root of compassion. You can't have compassion if you're not in a playful state, because compassion is seeing life in somebody, not just believing they're sad, but seeing them as alive and sad. And they're having this experience of the aliveness in the mysterious third. put those all together, and what I think play does is it brings us to an encounter with life itself, with life with a capital L. The thing that flows through us and between us, because life doesn't exist in us. We're living ecologies. Life is a thing that's synergetic. It's between things. And the play is putting us in the place of connecting to livingness. And I believe it's the only thing that gets us there. So that's, I hope I did it. I don't know if I did it.
Good setup.
That's
Because
yeah, okay,
let's
yeah,
so back to
yeah,
this
yeah.
Harold and the Purple Crayon.
Yeah.
You know, like you got a couple of books that are, you know, they have the jacket of a typical book, you know, like this is
Yeah.
a description. And then you've got this Harold and the Purple Crayon. And again, I think it was a beautiful tip of the hat to how we can be playful and
Mhm.
have such depth. I mean, you're quoting from and Winnicott
Mhm.
and all kinds of people
Mhm.
describing this glorious book that has these powerful stages. And you did a thank you for that. It was a feast for experience.
Yeah.
So will you set us up on Harold and the Purple Crayon, and then also, of course, paralleling therapy and personal development and resilience and creativity and all that.
Yeah. Well, just a really quick
Good,
biographical sketch.
please.
So Ellenhorn, the company, was in a way a kind of commemoration for the death of my creative self through that definition of me as broken.
Mm.
It was a kind of sculpture for the pain of being othered. And it helped me with my recovery. And once it helped me with my recovery, I wanted to get back to the hippie school, right? And so those first two books are part of the recovery, and Harold is now I can talk about play. Now I
Wow,
can
that's a
talk
great
about
narrative. You don't
right.
need to be quick on that, man. That's good.
Okay, good. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so now, now I'm back with the hippies and 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 it's a joy. It's just a joy, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think what one of the things that Harold the Purple Crayon is doing is saying that Crockett Johnson, the guy who wrote it, is one of our ancestors, who is telling us that there is a way in our modern times where we don't have to go back to tradition to feel connected. But it takes work. It takes a self that can play and can be creative with their existence. That is the gift of modernity, is improvisation. And it's also the way to fight against the dangers of modernity, which is alienation and our disconnection from others. So Harold the Purple Crayon, Crockett Johnson is, part of a group of ancestors who don't talk philosophy, they talk art. So he's related to John Coltrane, to Bootsy Collins, to Aretha Franklin, to Mel Brooks, to Bugs Bunny, to Woody Guthrie, to I could just go on and on. He's related to all of these actual kind of American thinkers, American musicians. There's an American thread to this. Started in the Transcendentalist, not started, tapped into with the Transcendentalist, tapped into the children of slaves on the banks of the Mississippi River, creating the number one American music, which is all about hope through improvisation. So there's this element in American life that what I call sacred originality, about how do you survive a world where traditions have been destroyed. You survive it through learning how to live an improvisational life and treating your life as art. And psychotherapy emerges from that too. So the book is really about like, what the hell was going on in 1955 America when this book was written? Because everybody was thinking about this at this time. They had this thing they were worried about. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called conformity. Like they were worried about it. They actually thought it was a bad thing. Like, remember, there were no Gaps or Banana Republics or J. Crews or anything then. They were thinking, oh my God, what is this conformity thing going on? It's really scary. And they were talking about how to kind of live this existence. Some of them were interdirectedness. And so the book is kind of a celebration of that, using Johnson's children's book and as sort of a time capsule from 1955. Yeah, 1955. Did you say Martin Luther King was catapulted into fame in 1955 because of the Montgomery bus boycotts. The Miles Davis Quintet was put together in 1955. I could go through a million things that were going on where there was all this element of play and improv and revolt. King wrote about the sacredness of human personality. He was his work was based on the idea of what happens to the sacredness of our originality when we're dehumanized. That is the sin of segregation. That's what he talked about. He was trying to celebrate that in each of us there is this growing, unique character that's destroyed by edification. And so all the movements not all of them, there are a lot of movements at that time, and I'm taking this time capsule from then and writing about how we need it now. Partly because the opposite of play is authoritarianism, and people are looking for a sense of community through an extreme version of community, which is sameness, homogeneity. Because authoritarianism really is just the process of homogeneity, and because they're scared, because they don't feel connected, they're choosing that route. That I just bebopped. I hope that's okay.
Done.
Yeah.
We'll use jazz as our reference today.
Yeah.
One cool thing about the way you began the book was really with the act of creation. You know, that there's this reference to Genesis and how I don't know, I really like what you were saying about something about you the nature of tradition and how we actually don't need to adhere necessarily to a tradition. We get into a bit of a dialogue between the conservative and the progressive there, because there is that part of us that, like, tradition connects us with lineage. It connects us with an orientation. It connects us with not having to reinvent some of the pathways and processes that have been established by those who've come before us, so that we don't have to, like, do all the heavy lifting ourselves necessarily. But then, of course, pushed to its extreme, we become beholden on pathways that have been laid before us by those who have come before us, and we don't get to experience the incarnational aspect of working through something to be the source of creation itself. And that was like, bam, you began right there, which again, to see Harold and the Purple Crayon, just know that you've got a dive into, like, religion, spirituality, psychoanalytic theory, physics, like tradition. How has writing that book, I'm interested in the process of how did writing that book transform your orientation, or what changes did you notice?
Well, can I just respond to something really quickly?
Please.
The right, well, I don't know, the right is just insane right now, but the Republicans, they were ringing a bell about the destruction of continuity in our lives. And they're right. The danger of a lack of continuity, sense of connectedness through some sense of sameness. They're terrified of it, and they give voice to that terror in all of us. They just don't see that the destruction of continuity is capitalism. In advertising, and Walmart's destroying downtowns, and they don't quite see that, but they're the group that is giving voice to that lack of continuity, and the left does a really shitty job at that. They just attack and attack and attack anything that has an experience of tradition to it, and in a sense of the good parts of homogeneity, which is sort of knowing your culture and being connected to others from your culture. So that's all I want to say. Writing it was it was just great. It was just great. It was like, it felt like making a piece of art. It never felt like I was having to write. It felt like I'm going to finally give voice to the things that I'm most concerned about. So I just wrote what's on my mind, in a way, what I think about when I think about these things. And I have this really great publisher named Karen Rinaldi at HarperCollins. She did the first Anthony Bourdain book, and she's just remarkable. So she's just great to work with. She's just brilliant. And so she's great to have conversations with. And so that also made it fun, that I knew that I was kind of writing it with her ear in mind, meant that I was writing to a friend, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I really, really loved writing it. Yeah.
Mm. So you referenced earlier another piece of your text was sacred originality. And that God, Ross, I've been so in your frameworks, you know, with all these books. Um, I want to dig into that concept of sacred originality. You know, of course, dovetailing against what you were, or with what you were writing in Harold and the Purple Crayon. So talk a little bit about what sacred originality is.
It's trying to parse out the beautiful side of individualism, because people just attack individualism as if it's one thing, you know, rugged individualism, as if collectivism doesn't have its problems,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's trying to say that the celebration of your uniqueness is sacred, and it's the thing to fight for, that there's an entire unique universe in you that belongs to you, and that your dignity and your sense of yourself needs to protect that, and needs to give it a voice in the world. But it's also saying that sacred originality is the thing you only feel when you're in relationship to others. So it's not cowboyism. It's I'm only gonna I feel really myself right now with you, John.
That's an
But I'm
honor.
talking to you. Yeah, it's an honor too.
Mm-hmm.
It's an honor to be here doing this, because I'm in a conversation. So I can only tap into it through dialogue, through connection, through art, through play, through things that are related. So to be sacredly original is to be related, to have the experience of relatedness. And so it's a little bit of, can we get back to that? Can we stop talking about the complete destruction of the ego? You know, can we come up with different concepts
That's
of
another
our core?
absurdity, I think, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
like,
yeah. Yeah, my partner talks about psychedelics are not ego death, or ego naps, which I
Yeah, yeah.
like. Yeah, yeah,
But
you know, yeah, yeah, yeah,
my conversation with Dimitri's coming out right before this one, so
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
people who listen will get a
yeah.
taste of both.
And it, and I think that there's like this kind of, I hope this gets to sacred originality. I'm going to go down this path. I think it will. There's a remarkable lesson in Genesis that's also the remarkable lesson in art, that you can't see anything as coherent unless things are placed in relationship to one another. So the uniqueness of something can only be seen when it's in relationship. That's all art is, that. All art is placing things in relationship to one another to then create coherence. And that's what God does after let there be light. He cuts up the world and then says, okay, there's evening and day, da 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 da. You know, I'm sorry, whatever, that you know, that process is all about, I'm going to create coherence by creating relationships. Relationships depend on separate things. You can't have a relationship with a relationship. Well, you can have a relationship with a relationship, but relationships are placing separate things in relationship to each other. But you can't experience separate things except if they're in a relationship. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is what art is. Art is always doing that. And if we treat our lives as art, we're always doing that. We're saying, I am unique. I am unique in relationship. I'm not unique as a cowboy. I'm unique as a person related to the world. And that's what I mean when I say living your life is art, that art teaches us that. that's kind of a different position than saying don't be a self, because selves are bad. And it's different than saying just be collective. It's saying there's this middle ground of play and creativity that's both. You know, I don't know if I made sense. I don't know if
It
I
is
got too
beautiful.
abstract, but
Yeah.
okay,
No,
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
But so you, I want to get geeky for a second,
Mm-hmm.
because I had a real, I love to read a book called Harold and the Purple Crayon, and to have the likes of Durkheim and Winnicott quoted. So I want to get a little geeky into psychoanalytic theory and certain frameworks that help us understand what's happening. Because so mine with Fromm, with Winnicott, talk about kind of your influences. You've talked about Tillich, kind of get into some of those traditions and thought frames that you're in that helped contribute to your process in this book.
Yeah, I mean, this is the, I mean, I don't know, this is the fruits of having a quote unquote attention problem, right? You just like shiny
Yeah.
object. I'm going to learn this person. I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to spend. I'm not going to read the whole book,
Yeah.
but I'm going to kind of move on to the next thing. And so this is sort of the pastiche of a person with ADD. It's like,
Yeah.
and plus I'm trained in sociology, so I have that background.
Yeah.
And I do have this passion for people talking, theorists talking, realizing that they're talking about different versions of the same thing, yeah. So I don't know, and musicians and artists and where are the commonalities in what we're saying and where are the differences too,
Why do you think you fell in love with Winnicott?
I think that his understanding of that middle space, the space between me and not me, as he puts it, the usness as a central therapeutic value, as a kind of medicine, and that has to happen through play, is both beautiful and it vindicates my pain. It says, yeah, the world stopped me playing. It's said you need to learn how to read and do math, and so there's something about him that speaks to me, and there's something about him that speaks to, I think, someone who was born in 62, that there was so much of this kind of playful stuff going on. To be a child and watch hippies was probably better than being a hippie, because you just saw all this cool shit going on, right? And you didn't know all the bad shit. You just saw people creating lives of
Give me a peek
stuff.
in there. What do you mean? What let your mind kind of populate?
Oh yeah, like bread and puppets. You go to a parade and there are these giant enormous puppets, or there'd be like these happenings where they put on these, like, these kind of like crazy art events where everybody's making art together in the room. And I didn't know that everybody was on something at those things, right? But it was just like, this is like a child's fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's something about him that brings me back to that time in a way. And Fromm was a sociologist turned psychoanalyst, so of course I'm going to feel like I have a brother there. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know. I like the pastiche of ideas. You and I talk about ineffable experience and noetic.
Yeah.
Can I read you a
Please.
great quote
Love it.
on that? The absence of any and everything you could think of, but the very essence of all that is.
Yeah.
You know what great philosopher that is? That's Bootsy Collins on funk.
Nice. Yes.
So that's the shit that I just turns me on. Like, okay, that's as good as William James talking about the ineffable.
Yeah,
that's
some Tibetan cave dweller from 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, and that him and George Clinton were having conversations like that.
Wow.
We're trying to create a music that's based on that. I mean, that's just like, that's mind blowing. That's more exciting to me than some Harvard dude that came up with American psychology. It's just, it is, it feels
Yeah.
more real, Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for always championing that perspective.
Yeah.
That's refreshing.
Yeah.
Certainly somebody that has kind of been through the ringer of the initiation process of the academy, and
Mm-hmm.
is in business, is really
Mm-hmm.
navigating this, to have you championing that voice of play. and
Mm-hmm.
and so to go back for a minute, you said something Dimitri said about you said your partner, I'm assuming it's
Mm-hmm.
Dimitri,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
ego death versus ego nap.
Yeah.
And I one time saw a mentor of mine do a really cool conversation between a monk, a Buddhist monk, and a Jungian analyst. The Jungian analyst was my colleague and mentor, and they had this dialogue around the ego and looking at the difference between an ego disillusion, or kind of to get rid of the ego, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to be very mindful of the organ of orientation that we call the ego and some of its inevitabilities. and
Ah.
and so I like the framework of a nap. And for anybody who's experienced a quote ego death, yes, it is very destabilizing. And though it's momentary, it's a
Yep.
disruption and a revelation of sorts. Um, but to have that be the crown jewel, um, that's a different orientation than saying let's be playful in this space. And so in the psychedelic space, I'm wondering about you looking at this kind of like, I need to go experience this. And I've had
Mm-hmm.
ego death,
Mm-hmm.
7 times. And
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, I painted my wall with
Yeah.
nail polish while on LSD, you know, like, and what's the difference?
Yeah.
So what do you go down that rabbit trail a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I, I, I just want to be careful that I'm not being disrespectful, because I think that people are doing psychedelics in just gorgeous ways,
Yeah.
and it's such meaningful ways in their lives. But I also have this, worry that, and maybe it's just my own prejudice, that we're not thinking enough about aliveness, like, shouldn't the goal not be brain plasticity, which AI has, but playfulness and aliveness in our lives, not during the trip, right?
Right.
How do we get to more aliveness? And if they can help us with that,
Mhm.
they're really important. But they're not the thing in itself. The thing in itself is who I am in the world without them. And do I feel alive? And that takes work. That takes choosing to be playful and working on that. So that's kind of, and then oneness. I think that psychedelics get us to a really profound sense of interconnectedness. I don't think it's as powerful as some of the moments I've had in my own psychotherapy of connectedness. I don't think it's as spiritual or as powerful. I just don't. Or as change activating as those moments. But it does create this interconnectedness that I think is beautiful. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that we're ecological beings.
Mhm.
But the pursuit of oneness, 30% of every population has people whose personalities are oriented towards oneness.
Mm.
And this is what the research sort of shows.
Mhm.
Those are the people who back authoritarian rulers because
Mhm.
they're looking for homogeneity.
Mhm.
And I worry about this focus on oneness a little bit, because I worry about its dangers to sacred originality. And I worry if people aren't looking for something that isn't necessarily helpful. But I do love the concept, and I do love the experience of interconnectedness. Now it reminds me of myself as an ecological being. So I'm ambivalent. Each side has its
Mhm.
pros and its cons, I don't like any fanaticism, and I don't like the fanaticism that's going on in the movement. I just don't. I don't trust fanaticism ever. I just don't. Maybe that's just me, but I just don't trust it. I never.
Well, I think that's well founded.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You said ecological being. What do you mean by ecological being?
That my life doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the in between me and the world, because that's where life is. Life is in me, but it's a thing. It's very connected to the stuff that this anthropologist Gregory Bateson would talk about. But I'm interconnected to the world, and life is something that goes. And this isn't mystical, right? It's like I'm dependent on the world around me, so life is coming. Right? It's this energy is coming in me every day when I eat. It's like, so that's what I mean by ecological being, and that I'm interconnected and I'm interdependent and all that. I think it does a great job of bringing you to that. Yeah. They just had this psychedelic conference in Denver, and Rick Doblin got up, who seems like a great guy. The guy had a maps, and behind him was this poster that said net zero trauma by 2027.
Wow.
And like, what? That's like saying net zero violence.
Right.
By 2027. That actually makes me feel terrified in a way, like that. Oh my God, how could somebody say that?
But give that voice a little bit. What do you mean? What's so terrifying about it?
That a thing you put in your mouth is going to get rid of the problem of trauma in this world, not human activity, not us reaching out to each other and creating communities and doing the work of being human. That this pill or this substance is going to get us there. The plant is going to get us there. It feels like idolatry to me. Yeah.
This to me is where Thich Nhat Hanh steps in and says socially engaged Buddhism, that like they will know us by our fruits. If your MDMA use is not in service to actually like drastically changing the way you live your life, then that's kind of is that what that's what you're saying? Yes.
Yeah. I was at a conference the other day, and we were talking, and somebody raised their hand and said, psychedelics aren't going to work until we completely change the health system in our country. And I said, if we completely change the health system in our country, we're not going to need psychedelics. It's like that's the work. The work is changing how we treat health, how we approach it, and psychedelics as an answer, it worries me. On the other hand, they're miraculous. Like, they're miraculous. They're little miracles. They create these miracles, and they're dangerous because they create miracles, because then we make them into miracles.
This goes into you talked about the idol, Eric Fromm and the idol, and it reminded me of Henri Corbin when he wrote The Idol and the Icon, and how I say it's like in Christianity, one of the commandments is not to create false idols, but then Christianity went ahead and created a false idol in its tradition.
Yeah.
That we don't have any, like other traditions had within them, a kind of destabilizing force that says, not that, not that, not that.
Yeah.
But Christianity seems to really say, no, this is it. And that's the thing. And so it is the idol. It's the thing versus the process. And so the MDMA pill versus how that changes my life or could change my life, and now live your life differently.
Yep. Exactly. Like, Moses goes up the mountain to talk to God, and he's going to develop this way of getting along so that you can be more yourself, because there's these rules. And he comes down, and while he was gone, everybody takes art, their jewelry, and they make this golden calf, and he's like, what the fuck? Like, you're not getting it, man.
You didn't get it, man.
And he throws the 10 Commandments down, right? Like, he's just like, what are you doing? And then, God says, you're not allowed to go into Canaan, but actually God doesn't let him go, because he's saying, you go in there, you're going to become an idol. You can't be going into that place. They'll make you into that really quickly, and I do think that Judaism in some ways, it like already, it doesn't work perfectly like all religions, but I do think that there's elements of Judaism that do try to say ruin idols, and then it says interpret We give you the
Yes.
tone
Oh,
for interpretation. So it's trying to kind of
yes.
get into that space. Yeah.
That was, I said that to my wife this morning, where we were
Yeah.
talking about this issue of like, the divinity and a dialogical model with Becca Tarnas is a person that I interviewed a while back, and she
Mhm.
gave me a reference to Jorge Ferrer, who's writing about a participatory model of the mystical,
Mm.
where you're not, again, you're and then tangential, right? Then Richard Rohr and I talked about how Christianity was not, it was not about the demonic, it was about the inevitabilities of the ego, and
Ah,
how we have a religious tradition that helps to navigate the complexities and inevitabilities and adaptations of our egos, as opposed to
wow.
projecting the shadow onto the demonic, and then we say, oh, that's the evil person, as opposed to this is,
Yeah.
how is this,
Wow.
you
But
know
that's Christianity, you're saying.
well, it's in its earliest
Yeah. Yeah.
form.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, but of course, all religious traditions on some level were teaching interpretive frameworks.
Mhm.
Were bringing people into their halls to recognize, like, here are the stages through life, and here's, it's even like Piaget. Like, here's your
Mhm.
concrete
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
okay, let's graduate from there, and now you're at this phase, and how modern Western religion has like none of that.
Yep.
It doesn't help us learn how to be interpreters of reality. It certainty, and
Yep. Yep.
back to our capitalist system, back
Yeah.
to our
Yep. Yep.
education
Yeah.
system, back to our mental health system.
Yeah. 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 You got me thinking. No, absolutely. And you got me thinking about, yeah, religion, when it's doing the right thing, it's teaching you how to deal with the problems of living.
Yeah.
And and that's moral philosophy.
Yeah.
And you know John Allen, right? John Allen?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what he says therapy is. It's moral philosophy in action. That's what therapy is. It's moral philosophy in action. You're having a
That's cool.
conversation about the
I
problems of living. It's a
yeah,
moral
and
event. Therapy's a moral event. Yeah, go ahead. What you can say?
I just need to dive into his world. I mean, he's done
Yeah,
so much for frameworks, that
yeah,
I like his stuff. Well, hey,
yeah.
I want to be conscious of time, and so that
Mhm,
we leave ourselves plenty, because I got two more main questions that I want
mhm,
to, and then we can
mhm,
kind of start closing. I could talk to you forever, of course,
mhm. You too. Yeah,
and I look forward to attempting to do that. By the way, offline.
I really
Um,
hope so. Yeah.
so let's go a little bit into forecasting and talking through, maybe a bit of a public service announcement on where we're trending and what you see future mental health, healthcare, psychedelics. Well, this is your time to fantasize and dream about how we could have this set up. Um, to riff a little bit on that.
I I think that there could be a shift, just like there was in the 50s, against conformity and authoritarianism. I do. I think that people might grab hold of other ways to create communities. I'm not completely optimistic about it. I don't know what it's like to be
Hmm.
a I don't know what it's like to be a cultural animal, the most cultural animal on earth, and have no continuity in your culture. I don't know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
But but I do think that I do think that this generation coming up are really interesting. They're,
Yes.
they're
Oh
they're
my
kind of,
God.
yeah, they kind of think playfully and
Yeah.
innovatively and
Yeah.
individually. They've got their own idols and they've got their own kind of nationalism and issues of identity and things like that. But I think that they're really a thoughtful group. They excite me. Um, I think I think I think mental health is at a bubble. I don't think it can last the way it's being done. I
Mhm.
think that um, mental health patients have increasingly gotten more voice, and I think that the discrepancies in what mental health does, paradigm shift when there's multiple discrepancies, and I think mental health has reached a vital point of discrepancy. There's too
Mhm.
many arguments against what we do,
Mhm.
including they don't know the root of any of these illnesses they call illnesses. So
Right.
that kind of stuff is just like at some point it's going to burst. And I
Mhm.
think that I think that there's hope in that. And by the way, John, all I do is give talks critical of the psychiatric system, and I give them in hospitals, and people agree.
They love
So
it.
it's not
Yeah.
most people are. It's the institutions. Most
They're
people
in.
believe this.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that um, I'm excited about I'm excited at Ellenhorn, my company, in this new movement towards what's called metabolic psychiatry, which is basically does think they may have found the root for a lot of psychiatric complaints, and it's in our
In the gut.
metabolism, in the gut, and
Mm-hmm.
in the mitochondria, and how to care for your gut in a way that does seem to have these profound effects on all kinds of psychiatric events. I think that that's going to be revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
We've got a crew here that I was so excited out at Methodist. You know, we were hanging
yes,
with
yeah,
this group.
yeah,
They're
yep,
doing fecal samples with all the folks that are coming in
yep,
and diving squarely into genetic, epigenetic,
yep.
gut issues. You know, like that's reassuring on so many levels.
Those guys are amazing.
They're
They're
amazing.
just
You know,
you
and
see,
and you know,
yeah,
years ago, you and I talked about this in our first conversation. I interviewed one of their music therapists, and they said they were
yeah,
doing shit like every psychiatric patient there has a playlist, and before they give them PRN meds, they go listen in this cone to their playlist, and they've reduced PRN meds by like 40 or 50%, something insane like
amazing.
that. Like
It's amazing.
more power to them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ben
Cool.
was,
Metabolic work. That's great.
yeah, yeah. So that's exciting. That's um, I don't know. That's uh, I I have this dream of getting my all my family together and living with them. I'm not sure my kids are crazy about it, but I have this dream. But I wonder if that's not a dream a lot of people are having now.
Yeah.
They, you know, yeah, I wonder if that's not a turn that's going to happen. I need
Mhm.
to be near the people I'm close to. That's where I can find continuity. I can't find it in the culture. I can't find it
Mhm.
at the mall, but I can find it in our family traditions, in our connectedness. And I just wonder if that's not going to happen more and more, where we just try to find each other and find a way to settle. And the fact that everything's becoming virtual, we can. I'm excited about that.
Mhm.
I also have this theory that the planet the planet wants us to become completely virtual and to become these couch potatoes because it's had it with us, and it just wants us to just not leave the house.
Can you guys go back to that whole response to COVID thing where the dolphins could swim and the whales could speak?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, let's just give you as much virtual reality as possible. Don't leave the house. You'll have Grubhub to deliver your stuff, and just don't fuck with nature anymore. Like, I'm just joking there, but it does feel like that
I-
we're heading that way. But anyways,
if
that,
I were
that
Earth,
yeah,
I would be secretly hoping that too.
yeah, yeah. But that's I don't know. I don't feel a lack of hope. I feel a lack of optimism. You know, hope is
Mhm.
the the sentiment that drives you through uncertainty to something you want. It's not everything's going to be okay. And I do feel hope. I don't feel a significant amount of yes, everything's going to be okay. I'm
Mhm.
really worried. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm worried.
Well,
But
what other
yeah,
threads, like when you think about our conversation, what threads are standing out that we didn't get to or address or close up?
I don't know. I mean, it takes too long to talk about it. I really am fascinated by this concept of hope, but maybe some other time we talk about it.
Hmm.
I think it's just a profoundly important thing like play to get to know, not to just say,
Hmm.
to learn it, to see what it is, and I do think it's part of play. I think that hope is the capacity to see something that feels like it's in your way and figure out a way around it, which sounds a lot like play. But I am very interested in hope and its relationship to our therapies and to our growth.
Actually, a
Mm-hmm.
good idea just came to mind about you, me, and Robert doing a conversation, given your mutual interest in hope and how
Oh,
we could just like dive into
yeah.
hope for a
I would
whole.
love that. I would
That would be
absolutely love
fun.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Let's
I would love that. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
let's close up today. I can just tell you, Ross, I'm from day one very excited to continue this riffing and improvisation that you and I will have
Mm-hmm.
done and will do together. I'm just so grateful for your time to be able to hang out and dig into some of these subjects. So thank you for making the space and for being such a loving and present participant.
Well, the thanks is to you, John. Come on.
Yeah, man.
It
Thank
got
you.
look what I got to do for 2 hours or whatever. But I really do. I really do appreciate it. And
Yeah, you too.
I really look forward to continuing this improv with you.
Good.
unfold. control.